Hello and welcome. I'm Professor Glenn Torres-Spelliscy, and this is the International Issue podcast series. Thanks for joining me.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Since the first atomic bomb exploded in the deserts of New Mexico in the 1940s, our civilization has had to endure the possibility that humankind could bring itself to a premature end. Unsurprisingly, the primary goal of U.S. nuclear policy for the last 50 years has been the prevention of a nuclear attack on the U.S.'s interests and allies. The primary way that the United States has sought to achieve this goal is through the adoption of a nearly globally accepted non-proliferation regime. We will discuss that regime in detail this week, with a particular focus on Iran. In the immediate aftermath of the first belligerent use of atomic weapons in Japan by the United States in 1945, there was an understandable rush by powerful nations to acquire the technology. By 1967, the US, the Soviet Union, France, Great Britain, and China had all successfully detonated nuclear devices. And as the number of nuclear powers began to spread, there was a growing effort to prevent the technology's further dissemination. There was also a recognition, however, that many of the same technologies that lead to nuclear weapons are also used in producing peaceful nuclear power. So the international community knew that it had to find a way to allow for peaceful nuclear energy while limiting the spread of nuclear weapons. In the end, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was adopted and opened for signature in July of 1968. To date, 189 countries have signed and ratified the treaty, with only India, Israel, North Korea, and Pakistan refusing to sign, and all being acknowledged as having illicit nuclear weapon programs. The NPT states that its primary purpose is to, quote, "to make every effort to avert the danger of nuclear war," close quote, by preventing the proliferation and dissemination of nuclear technology beyond the declared nuclear powers of the time. The prohibition against the proliferation of nuclear technology is contained in Article 2 of the NPT, which obligates non-nuclear states not to pursue or accept nuclear weapons technology. However, as stated above, the treaty explicitly recognizes the right of all states to develop peaceful nuclear technology for energy purposes under Article 4. Under the law, a state has, to use the language of the treaty, an inalienable right to develop peaceful nuclear technology. I want us to remember that key point when talking about Iran's program. Under the law, they have a right to a peaceful nuclear technology program, but they do not have an obligation not to militarize that technology. The problem, however, is that many of the same methods are used in developing both military and peaceful capabilities. Thus, the intention of the state actor is not always clear. In order to enforce the obligations under the treaty and prevent the development of nuclear military capabilities, each non-nuclear state is obligated to enter into a safeguards agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA, for the exclusive purpose of verification of the fulfillment of its obligations assumed under the treaty, with a view to preventing the diversion of nuclear energy from peaceful uses to nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices under Article 3. Which brings us to the issue of Iran. Iran has been a consistent opponent of the U.S. in the international arena since the Islamic Revolution overthrew the U.S.-supported Shah in the 1950s, and Iranian students overtook the U.S. Embassy, holding diplomats hostage for months in the late 1970s. The U.S. support of Israel and Iran's vitriolic position towards Israel further alienates the two nations. Still more concerning is the Iranian regime's close relationship with non-state groups, who possess extreme views and are willing to launch large-scale attacks against civilian populations. These concerns were further amplified in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, and policymakers became focused on ensuring that nuclear weapons did not make their way into the hands of extremist groups like Al-Qaeda.
And there's a reason. We've experienced the horror of September the 11th. We have seen that those who hate America are willing to crash airplanes into buildings full of innocent people. Our enemies would be no less willing. In fact, they would be eager to use biological or chemical or a nuclear weapon. Knowing these realities, America must not ignore the threat gathering against us. Facing clear evidence of peril, we cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Iran ratified the NPT in 1970 and is therefore bound by its provisions. Pursuant to Article 3 in 1974, Tehran concluded a comprehensive safeguards agreement with the IAEA. The safeguards agreement includes a commitment by Iran to 1. Be transparent with respect to its nuclear programs, 2. Limit the quantity of enriched uranium that it possesses, and 3. Allow international inspectors access to nuclear sites. Now, Iran has continuously insisted that its nuclear program is focused solely on the development of peaceful nuclear technology.
The leader of Iran's Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, says Tehran is not seeking nuclear weapons.
ما دنبال سلاح هسته‌ای نیستیم و اقتدار را در سلاح هسته‌ای نمی‌دانیم و اقتدار متکی به سلاح هسته‌ای را می‌توانیم بشکنیم و انشالله این ملت این کار را خواهد کرد.
Despite these assurances from Iran, however, in 2003, the IAEA reported that they had discovered evidence that Iran had begun secretly enriching uranium. As a result, the IAEA concluded that Iran was in violation of its safeguard agreement. Tensions would continue to rise over the course of the next decade, until Iran elected a more moderate leader in 2013, Hassan Rouhani. Rouhani had previously held the title of Iran's top nuclear negotiator, and the Obama administration seized the opportunity to attempt to reinvigorate negotiations. Within a month of Rouhani's inauguration, nuclear negotiations had resumed.
Rouhani of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The two of us discussed our ongoing efforts to reach an agreement over Iran's nuclear program. Now, we're mindful of all the challenges ahead. The very fact that this was the first communications between an American and Iranian president since 1979 underscores the deep mistrust between our countries, but it also indicates the prospect of moving beyond that difficult history. But I believe we've got a responsibility to pursue diplomacy, and that we have a unique opportunity to make progress with the new leadership in Tehran.
In July 2015, a final agreement was reached between Iran and the P5+1 negotiating group, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA. Under the JCPOA, Iran agreed to repurpose the uranium and plutonium plants, cut back the number of operational centrifuges, cap its level of enrichment to far below weapons grade, and cap its stockpile of enriched uranium for 15 years, as well as a number of other significant limitations. In President Obama's words, every pathway to a nuclear weapon is cut off.
After 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not: a comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon. This deal meets every single one of the bottom lines that we established when we achieved a framework earlier this spring. Every pathway to a nuclear weapon is cut off, and the inspection and transparency regime necessary to verify that objective will be put in place.
In addition, the agreement imposed the most invasive peacetime inspection regime ever constructed by the IAEA to ensure that Iran complied with the terms of the deal, leading President Obama to suggest that the deal is not built on trust, it is built on verification. Up and down the supply chain, the Iranian program would be subject to constant electronic monitoring, coupled with significant in-person inspections. In return, Iran got much-needed relief from international sanctions, as it demonstrated compliance with the terms of the deal. The deal was endorsed by the United Nations Security Council, and in January of 2016, the IAEA announced that Iran was complying with its obligations. The deal, however, would soon be thrown into question. President Trump was an opponent of the deal from the outset. On the campaign trail, he lambasted the deal as one of the worst ever, stating that he would renegotiate.
That deal will be totally renegotiated or worse. Or worse.
Or worse for who?
We will, for Iran, not for us, believe me, for Iran. They have suckered us. They have taken advantage of stupid people, stupid representatives, people that are incompetent, whether it's Kerry or our president.
In October 2017, President Trump announced that he would decertify Iranian compliance with the deal. And in May 2018, he announced that he was unilaterally withdrawing the United States from the JCPOA.
Today, I want to update the world on our efforts to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. The Iranian regime is the leading state sponsor of terror. It exports dangerous missiles, fuels conflicts across the Middle East, and supports terrorist proxies and militias such as Hezbollah, Hamas, the Taliban, and Al-Qaeda. In 2015, the previous administration joined with other nations in a deal regarding Iran's nuclear program. This agreement was known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. The deal lifted crippling economic sanctions on Iran in exchange for very weak limits on the regime's nuclear activity and no limits at all on its other malign behavior, including its sinister activities in Syria, Yemen, and other places all around the world. The fact is, this was a horrible, one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made. It didn't bring calm, it didn't bring peace, and it never will. After these consultations, it is clear to me that we cannot prevent an Iranian nuclear bomb under the decaying and rotten structure of the current agreement. The Iran deal is defective at its core. Therefore, I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
President Trump appears to have shared the concerns of U.S. allies in Saudi Arabia and Israel, that the deal would provide Iran with a decade or so to lick its wounds after a devastating sanctions regime, emerging stronger and with an ambition to assert control over the entire region. Indeed, the deal did nothing to address concerns over Iranian support for non-state actors engaged in conflicts with Saudi Arabia and Israel, nor did it rein in Iran's ballistic missile program. President Trump was clearly trying to entice the Iranians, as well as Europe, Russia, and China, to come back to the bargaining table, to renegotiate the agreement to attempt to curb such belligerent Iranian behavior. Indeed, the Trump administration's withdrawal from the agreement backfired. Our allies didn't seek to renegotiate, and Iran resumed enrichment of uranium to levels far beyond what was allowed under the previous agreement. With the election of Joe Biden as president, the U.S. has expressed a desire to rejoin its allies in the JCPOA. However, this has proven difficult. A lot has changed since the deal was first negotiated. First, the Iranians will want to ensure that any resumption of the deal includes a loosening of all sanctions placed on Iran by the Trump administration. Indeed, the conflict has hardened the resolve of Iranian hardliners, with former members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard now controlling 2/3 of Parliament's presiding board. From the U.S. perspective, the U.S. will likely want to see Iran return to compliance with its obligations under the JCPOA. A task will be increasingly difficult as China and Russia have continued to solidify their support for Iran in the last 2 years. Indeed, in March 2021, China and Iran inked a 25-year cooperation agreement. Now, importantly, The U.S. intelligence community's most recent assessment is that Iran is not actively taking steps to produce a nuclear weapon, despite its increased levels of enrichment. Still, significant concerns exist, as most experts suggest that if Iranian leadership wanted to produce enough material for a nuclear weapon, it could do so in a matter of weeks, not months, not years. This makes the negotiation of a new agreement even more important. Well, that does it for this week's short introductory podcast. Go on to do the readings, and I will see you on the discussion board.